At 2:47 a.m. deep over the Black Sea, a Russian coastal radar picked up something that should have been impossible: a cluster of Ukrainian drones slipping straight into Crimea's most heavily protected airspace. Within seconds, alarms lit up across Russian defense networks. Missiles worth millions of dollars launched into the night sky. Yet the targets kept coming. What unfolded next didn't just expose a gap in Russia's defenses, it revealed a historic shift in modern warfare. Low-cost garage-built drones outsmarting systems designed to stop the world's most advanced aircraft. Tonight, we're not just breaking down a battlefield incident, we're exploring a moment that military analysts say could rewrite the rules of air defense forever. Because if devices costing less than a smartphone can slip past radar systems the size of houses, what does that mean for the balance of power in the 21st century? Welcome to War Mechanics, where we break down global conflicts, game-changing technology, and the moments reshaping our world, one real-time story at a time. Before we dive in, let me ask you, do you believe the future of warfare belongs to expensive weapons or to smart, creative tactics? To grasp the magnitude of what unfolded that night, you have to picture where it happened and what that ground represented. Crimea isn't some forgotten peninsula on a map. Since Russia's annexation in 2014, it's been transformed into a fortress, the crown jewel of Moscow's southern defenses. Miles of coastline lined with anti-ship missiles, radar domes glittering like glass eyes across the hills, and underground command centers carved straight into the cliffs. Every inch of that landscape was wired for detection and retaliation. At the top of it all sat Mount Ai, rising nearly 3,600 feet above the Black Sea. It was more than a hill, it was a brain, a command post, feeding data to every S-400 missile battery in western Crimea. Inside those massive white domes were radar systems capable in theory of spotting stealth aircraft or ballistic missiles hundreds of miles away. Each antenna was worth more than most American fighter jets. For years, NATO analysts quietly agreed this was a no-fly zone in every sense of the term. Penetrating it with a manned jet would have been suicide. Even sophisticated cruise missiles risked interception before crossing the shoreline. And yet on that early morning, 10 improvised Ukrainian FPV drones, each no larger than a kitchen table, built for less than the cost of an iPhone, slipped into that same airspace undetected. They weren't flying with the arrogance of power, but with the precision of math and the quiet confidence of ingenuity. When those tiny propellers began to hum across the Black Sea, the entire doctrine of modern air defense was about to be rewritten. Because in warfare, it's never the size of the weapon that defines history, it's the idea behind the trigger. So the real question becomes, how did backyard-engineered drones dismantle one of the most advanced radar systems ever built? And what does that reveal about the future of every military on Earth? At 2:47 a.m. local time, a Russian coastal patrol boat near Sevastopol picked up a faint return on its radar, a blip so small it could have been a flock of birds or sea clutter. But the signal kept repeating, steady and deliberate, closing in fast. Within seconds, operators realized it wasn't nature. Something mechanical was moving low over the Black Sea, hugging the waves like it knew where the radar's blind spots were. The officer on duty hesitated only a heartbeat before relaying the alert to the command center on Mount Ai, where radar screens began to flicker alive in a storm of noise. 5 targets appeared, then vanished. The computers tried to filter them out as false echoes, but then they reappeared again, closer this time. The order went out: engage immediately. A Panzer S-1 air defense system on the coast swiveled its radar dish and unleashed 5 surface-to-air missiles worth over $300,000 each. Brilliant flashes tore through the night sky, but when the smoke cleared, every drone was still flying. Not one hit. The reason was buried in physics. Each drone was flying perpendicular to the radar beam, creating what's called a Doppler notch, a maneuver that tricks radar into thinking a moving target is standing still. Combined with their low altitude, the radar's computer mistook them for harmless ground clutter. In plain terms, the system's brain saw them but decided they didn't exist. The Russian operators scrambled for answers, shouting over the radio as their screens filled with ghosts. More targets appeared, each smaller than a suitcase, darting across the sea like mechanical hornets. That's when the realization hit: this wasn't a random swarm. It was a coordinated strike designed not to overwhelm, but to humiliate. Because at that very moment, a $15,000 drone was outsmarting one of the world's most advanced air defense systems, and the men inside the bunker could only watch. And what came next would prove that this was only the opening move. The order came down from Mount Ai with a single word: no soldier ever wants to hear engage. Within moments, the Pantsir S-1 on the Crimean shoreline spun its radar dish toward the intruder's servos, whining in the night. On the operator's display, 5 small returns crept toward the coast, too slow for missiles, too erratic for aircraft. Still, he locked on and fired. 5 surface-to-air missiles arced into the sky, their exhaust carving white scars across the darkness. 30 million rubles, roughly $330,000 each, gone in less than 20 seconds. Every missile tracked flawlessly, according to the system's diagnostics. And yet when the smoke cleared, the drones were still there, still moving. The gunner switched to his 30mm cannons, pouring tracer fire into the horizon. The glowing rounds looked spectacular, but not one found a mark. What the Russian crew didn't know was that the Ukrainian drones were flying 50 feet off the deck at a perfect right angle to the radar beam, exploiting a physics trick called the Doppler notch. To the radar's computer, their sideways velocity appeared 0, so the system's own filters deleted the targets as background noise. By the time the operators realized their multi-million-dollar defense system had turned into an expensive light show, radio channels were chaos. Commands overlapped with shouts of disbelief. One officer demanded air support. Another screamed that his missiles wouldn't track, and then help arrived. A Russian Su-30 fighter dove out of the pre-dawn sky, twin engines blazing, its radar sweeping the air like a searchlight. On paper, the BAR's phased array system could detect a golf ball at 70 miles. In practice, it couldn't keep a steady lock on a plastic drone the size of a microwave. The pilot launched an R-73 missile anyway, then another. Each one cost $200,000 and could pull 40 Gs at Mach 2.5. But the drone's thermal signatures were cooler than a car hood after sunset. The infrared seeker had nothing to chase. The missiles screamed past, detonating harmlessly over the sea. 4 missiles, hundreds of cannon rounds, and 0 hits. The mighty Russian air defense network, the system built to guard an empire, had just been outsmarted by drones assembled with off-the-shelf parts and $200 GoPro cameras. The real damage, though, was only beginning. As Russian radar operators stared at their failing screens, something even stranger began to appear: new radar contacts materializing 10 miles off Crimea's coast and rising from the sea like ghosts. To every analyst on the mountain, it looked impossible. Nothing had flown in from Ukraine, nothing had crossed the shoreline. Yet suddenly, dozens of tiny signals were swarming toward Mount Ai. What Moscow didn't realize was that these weren't aircraft at all. They were coming from the Black Sea itself, launched by an armada that didn't officially exist. Just offshore, a cluster of low-slung, unmarked, uncrewed surface vessels, or USVs, sat quietly in the waves. Each looked like an oversized fishing boat, but beneath the fiberglass hulls were antennas, fuel tanks, and racks of FPV combat drones, the same kind that had humiliated Russian defenses hours earlier. These boats belong to a class Ukraine calls the Ursula Relay Fleet, a floating extension of the country's digital battlefield. Think of them as mobile Wi-Fi towers with teeth. Each vessel carried long-range radio transmitters or Starlink uplinks, connecting directly to operators sitting safely hundreds of miles away in Odessa. Those operators weren't in cockpits or bunkers. They were in offices, maybe even cafes, flying drones across the sea in real time. Commands left their laptops, jumped through encrypted networks, bounced off satellites, and reached the Ursula boats, which then relayed those signals to the drones streaking toward Crimea. The result was a control chain that covered more than 200 miles of ocean with only a handful of boats. The system bypassed the Earth's curvature, maintained crystal-clear video links, and made it nearly impossible for Russia to pinpoint who was flying what. Even if Russian forces detected the transmissions, they couldn't strike back, not without hitting civilian shipping lanes or their own radar blind zones. By dawn, more Ursulas surfaced across the horizon, each launching its payload. The new drones didn't attack in formation like traditional aircraft. They moved irregularly, scattered, chaotic, unpredictable, so that no 2 radar pings looked the same. To the Russian computer systems, it wasn't a coordinated assault. It looked like noise. But behind that chaos was precision, a digital symphony of remote pilots turning the world's most expensive air defense network into a blind man's bluff. The question now isn't how they launched, but why these drones targeted Mount Ai first. What was hidden beneath those domes that made it worth the risk? For hours, Russian commanders clung to a comforting belief: if drones showed up, they must have come from Ukraine. A straight-line threat. Predictable, trackable, familiar. But that belief didn't survive the night. As radar domes on Mount Ai erupted in fire and circuitry meltdown, new contacts began to appear, not from the west, but from the south. Dots materializing over the Black Sea just 6 to 7 miles off Crimea's shoreline. No flight path, no border crossing, simply there. Operators assumed software malfunction, maybe sea clutter, maybe ghost reflections, but then thermal sensors confirmed the nightmare: these drones were launching from the water. Waiting below the radar's minimum detection angle were disguised USVs, sleek, uncrewed vessels riding low against the waves. They looked like harmless commercial boats. Their speed, under 23 mph, exactly the threshold Russia's coastal defense computers automatically screened out as non-threatening civilian movement. Ukraine didn't defeat Russian radar. It designed its attack to be ignored by it. Each USV carried rails of FPV drones like floating carrier decks. When the first wave struck the radar network, these seaborne launchers activated, sending up new swarms, timed to hit fresh targets while confusion exploded across every Russian channel. And the pilots controlling them? They weren't anywhere near Crimea. They were sitting over 100 miles away, safe inside Ukrainian territory, sipping coffee in front of a screen. Commands traveled through encrypted satellite networks. The drone video feeds returned the same way. A floating Wi-Fi relay station handled the dangerous part, silently bridging the gap between operator and battlefield. Russia had prepared for fast jets at high altitude. It had never imagined cheap electric drones popping up from a blind spot carved by geometry and complacency. Every assumption shattered at once. If drones didn't need to cross the front, if they could appear inside Russia's strongest defense zone, if the Black Sea itself could become a runway. Then one question kept Russian commanders frozen at their consoles. If Ukraine can launch from Crimea's backyard unseen, what comes next that Moscow still doesn't understand? Russia's entire defensive network was built on one belief: if one system struggled, another would step in. But on Mount Ai, redundancy became a myth. Once the first radars fell, the second wave of Ukrainian drones pivoted to the Podlet K-1, the low-altitude guard dog meant to catch anything sneaking beneath the horizon. Without it, cruise missile-style attackers could slip in at treetop height like ghosts. A shaped charge kissed the transmitter panel, and a split second later, every screen tied to that system flatlined. The Russians still had the Nebo-M, their prized stealth spotter, or so they thought. When its dome ruptured and the antenna array took a vertical blast of molten copper, every S-400 battery relying on long-range cueing went blind beyond 25 miles. Suddenly, the weapons that once terrified NATO were no better than museum pieces. The panic spread next to artillery and naval operators. A Russian BK-16 patrol craft, its radar showing unknown objects buzzing straight toward it, opened fire into nothing but sea spray. Small caliber rounds shredded ocean foam, while a drone calmly followed GPS waypoints, ramming into the bow with robotic indifference. Dozens of miles away, missile crews begged for coordinates they no longer had. The brains of the entire sector, the Ai command post, tried to reboot a broken picture, but without data, its servers were just expensive metal boxes. Then came the final blow: a drone drilled into its reinforced entrance, vaporizing racks of communication hardware and igniting classified material. The command network didn't degrade, it collapsed. No radar to scan, no sensor to hand off, no launcher to guide. Every link severed like someone had cut every wire at once. Russia's Black Sea shield, years of engineering, billions in investment, reduced to isolated units staring into darkness. And as alarms continued to scream into the void, one chilling truth echoed in every headset: if this mountaintop could fall in minutes. What else was now exposed? When the last radar on Mount Airy went silent, it wasn't just a local blackout. It was a continental shift in who controlled the sky above the Black Sea. For decades, Russia believed its layered air defense network was impenetrable, a fortress of S-400 launchers, early warning radars, and hardened command centers. But in under 15 minutes, drones that cost less than a family vacation had erased what billions of rubles built. Now the invisible shield that once protected Crimea had holes big enough to fly a bomber through. High-value targets like ammunition depots, rail lines, and warships, once safely tucked behind radar coverage, were suddenly naked. Every Russian commander in the region knew the new reality. If Ukraine could blind them here, they could blind them anywhere. Worse, the psychological impact rippled far beyond Crimea. Moscow's propaganda insisted the S-400 was unbeatable, capable of swatting stealth jets out of the sky. But if it couldn't stop hobby-class quadcopters, what did that say about the Kremlin's claim to military dominance? NATO analysts took notice. China took notice. Every nation watching now understood the same lesson: supremacy in modern warfare doesn't come from price tags, it comes from adaptability. And Ukraine just rewrote the rulebook. Perhaps the most damaging consequence for Russia wasn't the hardware destroyed, but the trust lost. Soldiers who once believed technology would save them now realized help might never come. Commanders who thought they saw everything now questioned what they were missing. A defense network that once felt like iron suddenly felt like paper. And the question echoing from Washington to Warsaw was simple. If a handful of drones could cripple Russia's strongest radar fortress, what happens the next time Ukraine decides to strike? What happened over Crimea was not just a tactical victory. It was a warning shot to the entire world. Military doctrine has always been built around one assumption: the most expensive weapon usually wins. But in just a few minutes, a swarm of drones that cost less than a recreational dirt bike dismantled one of the most fortified air defense networks on the planet. If the balance of power can shift that easily, then the rules of war may have already changed without anyone officially acknowledging it. So here's the real question we are left with. Are we watching the birth of a new military era where ingenuity and affordability decide outcomes? A future where a soldier with a tablet can defeat a jet pilot with decades of training? If so, how do nations prepare for that? And what happens to the prestige weapons, the billion-dollar missile shields, the next-generation fighters designed to dominate the skies? Are they now vulnerable to the very tools they once dismissed as toys? Can expensive hardware still guarantee security when smaller, smarter enemies can simply go around it, under it, or through it? Most importantly, where do you stand in this shift? Do you believe that low-cost innovation is the ultimate equalizer, allowing smaller nations to challenge powerful militaries? Or do you argue that high-end weapons are still necessary to maintain global stability and prevent all-out chaos? The world's defenses are being rewritten from the ground up. Share your thoughts. The future of warfare is already here, and the debate starts with us. Tonight, a mountain fortress once trusted to shield Crimea has gone dark. Not because of billion-dollar jets or cyber superweapons, but because a handful of low-cost drones exposed how fragile modern defenses can be. The world's strongest militaries now face a new threat they cannot ignore. War has shifted. Ingenuity just beat raw power, and every nation is rewriting its playbook. If you want to stay ahead of these changes, if you want the truth behind the headlines and the stories governments hope you miss, stick with us. Support this mission by sharing this report with someone who needs to see it, and subscribing so you never miss what comes next. Every one of those actions helps this channel bring you the investigations others don't dare to cover. This has been War Mechanics, where we track the turning points shaping our future. See you in the next briefing.